Throughout this year, we have dedicated our talks to establishing an understanding of God itself, the way it works, what it does, how to use it, spirit knowing itself, the discovery of mind, and the triune nature of God as spirit, soul, or law, and body. And last week, we were blessed to see Reverend Sandy's talk also. It was fantastic and keeping in alignment with everything that we all believe here. And thank you so much for doing that so that we could be with our daughter and our wonderful congregation could hear a new voice, which was fabulous. Thank you. And so today our talk is entitled and continued to be based on the book, Our Relationship with God.
Well, I want to talk about the law of emergence. I read a book about it not too long ago, and it kind of sparked an interest in me, and so I started looking it up and finding more information. And I found there's a lot of different areas that deal with the law of emergence, including physics and philosophy and economics and nature, and there are a lot of areas in which they actually talk about the law of emergence. And it's defined as this: emergence occurs when an entity is observed to have properties its parts do not have on their own. Properties or behaviors which emerge only when the parts interact in a wider whole. Now, there are a lot of powerful implications for that for spirituality, aren't there? I'll read it again. Emergence occurs when an entity is observed to have properties its parts do not have on their own. Properties or behaviors which emerge only when the parts interact in a wider whole. Can you see places in life where that actually appears, where you can see that? One of the most profound examples of that I've seen throughout my research has been in the area of nature and snowflakes. Now, snowflakes are pretty simple. They're basically just hydrogen and oxygen molecules that have joined together and then crystallized. But there are only three of them, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. The question is, why do they always crystallize with 6 sides or 6 stems? I did a lot of research on this and looked it up in a lot of scientific sites. Not a one could say why that happens. They can say it always does. And why is it that they always create such intricate patterns, but none of them are ever alike? The chances of 2 snowflakes being exactly alike are extremely improbable. And what's also fascinating is that snowflakes form at a very high altitude, and as they begin to fall and they gain weight, a little bit of mass, since they're creating more mass, they're also creating a little bit of gravity. So therefore they're actually pulling other snowflakes to them. But as the snowflakes join with them, they still continue to have only 6 sides. By the way, the largest snowflake in history, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, was in Montana in 1887. It was said to be 15 inches. Now, I don't know how they measured that. Of course, it was an aggregate of a lot of snowflakes put together, but it still only had 6 sides. Pretty fascinating, isn't it? What is it that decides that a snowflake, such a delicate structure, such a delicate pattern, will always have 6 stems, 6 sides? Is there some kind of divine intelligence there that decides that?
Yeah, God.
Yeah. Science says that because the oxygen molecules have a slightly less dense structure than the hydrogen molecules, when they actually freeze, the hydrogen molecules collapse more than the oxygen ones do. But still, why does that create 6 sides? No science reports that I could find could possibly describe that. So it has to go with the idea that, we are all individualized expressions of the one, as snowflakes are, and no 2 of us are exactly alike. like snowflakes, but we all represent the divine whole. So looking at ourselves, in comparison to snowflakes, emergence occurs when an entity is observed to have properties its parts do not have on their own, properties or behaviors which emerge only when the parts interact in a wider whole. So we are all individualized expressions of the one life, the one being. Of course, we don't appear to have spiritual qualities, and some of us don't quite often act like we have spiritual qualities, but we do. And they are all within us. In the human experience, what actually is emerging is our level of conscious awareness. Because God is all that is, because God is all that is, God is all present, and so therefore God is everywhere. And so therefore there can be no spot where God is not. I like to do, when people ask me to do an invocation, I've always been kind of troubled with that idea, because an invocation is actually invoking the presence of God into the place where we are. And the way I see it, God is already here. And so therefore I always, when I do an invocation, invoke our conscious awareness into this divine space where God is. And so the idea of emergence, in terms of spirituality, in terms of us in this human experience, is not necessarily God emerging before us, but our conscious awareness that it is already here, so that we are aware of it being here. Nothing is actually coming to us or emerging through us that has not already always been there. Because all we are is God's stuff. That's all we are. So how, therefore, can God emerge to us? The gift has already been given. We've already received. But we're not always aware of it. We're already and always have been it. We are realizing or awakening more than we are actually receiving. We're awakening to that possibility, that divine truth, that God is all we are. The full nature of who and what we are has always been with us, but we have not always recognized that divine potential of who we are. Treatment is the conditioning of the mind to be consciously aware of our true nature. Treatment is not asking God to bring something to us or to give us something, to have God appear before us, as we may think that the law of emergence would be stating, but actually it's our willingness to accept, to condition our minds to understand the fullness and the truth of who we are. So therefore any issues, any challenges, problems we may have will just automatically disappear. Because if God is all that is, and God is good, then there can be no problems or issues or challenges. But we do experience them, don't we? All of our lives, we have been conditioned by our physical perspective to view God as the father figure, to believe God will give us the kingdom, because that's what the Bible says, when the truth is that we already are the kingdom. God is the kingdom, and we are of God, so by the nature of who we are and what we are, God in expression, all we have to do is recognize and remember our truth, that we are God in expression, and we are the fullness of all that is. We're quite often challenged and blessed by our physical expression at the same time, are we not? Sometimes we live on the physical side, sometimes we live on the spiritual side, and it's kind of hard to balance the two. Ernest Holmes says, "The science of mind and spirit makes a tremendous claim when it states that the individual should be free from the bondage of sickness, poverty, and unhappiness. It does, however, carefully set forth the conditions under which freedom operates and the laws governing life, stating in no uncertain terms that unless man understands these conditions and obeys these laws, he will not receive full benefit from its teachings." Teachings of science of mind. Unless we understand the truth of these conditions and obey the laws, we will not receive the full benefit. Now the challenge is that we always are using the conditions, and we always are using the laws, but maybe we're not receiving the benefits the way we would like to. our negative thinking, our viewpoint on the way life is always showing up for us. What we think about, we bring about, and we experience. So to understand the conditions and obey the laws in a positive way will allow us to actually benefit fully from the teaching. Understanding our spiritual nature allows us to benefit from the teaching of Science of Mind. Recognizing the universal power of who and what we are enables us to use that power for our benefit. We don't have to work the system, we simply have to be the system, and it does emerge to us and for us.
Oh gee, that seems short to me. I'm up. Well, I'm going to talk about that father idea from my perspective in a few moments also. But during this reading, there were several ideas that I took from it. And one of them is that you can find the apparent differences in what Ernest Holmes says, or you can see how it's yes and no. It's both when he writes. So there are many places that we can find the words, ye are God. But in this chapter, he writes, we are not God. Our nature is identical to God nature. And we have indeed talked about that today. I kind of chuckled as Mark gave the reflection, and it was joy, because the nature of God is joy. And Sandy talked about love and loving relationships, and the nature of God is love. And David talked about emerging, and we are always in that process, and that is a part of the law. And the more we learn about these laws, the better we're able to use them. When Sandy was talking about the time in her life where she was looking introspectively, she was talking about the good work that we do, because I do not believe, knowing Sandy, that she was ever a bad person. But what I believed she was looking to do was to look at how she could shift some of the belief systems she had to attract the wonderful man of her dreams. And likewise for both of us, and I'm sure some of you. So we are a spiritual likeness of God. The whole scheme of life is reenacted through each one of us. Ernest Holmes wrote, we cannot demonstrate beyond our ability to provide a mental equivalent of our desire. We do not demonstrate. That means bring into our lives beyond an ability to provide a mental equivalent, a thought that is in alignment with that which we desire. Obviously, those individual snowflakes were still knowing that when they ended up as a clump, they would still have 6 sides, 6 points. So the idea for this, and I'm going to use poverty, but you use whatever word is going on in your life that you're looking for a shift. If one thinks poverty for years and years, that one has personified a law which continues to perpetuate the condition of that poverty. The opposite can be said also. If one thinks wealth for years, that one has personified a law which continues to perpetuate a condition of wealth. And likewise for our relationships, for our joy, for our love, for whatever it is that we are desiring to experience more of. The one who is the thinker of any specific thought sets the law in motion. Often it is in our subconscious mind, or the subjective state of mind, where these thoughts are occurring. Now that means that we have not yet brought them to that space of consciousness where we are able to really work with them. So that for me was one of the real defining moments in my learning of the science of mind, was to learn that I was that powerful. To believe that I was that powerful, that by changing my thinking and learning about the laws and how the laws operate, that I could attract whatever I desired into my life. So I came up with a little saying: an undesired thought must be faced, erased, and replaced. And so those words, face, means that we are willing to look at what is demonstrating, what is the effect in our life. We are willing to look at that, and instead of say, oh, poor me, or it's because so-and-so did this to me, or this happened when I was a child, or whatever, we're blaming or shaming, or even blaming ourselves. Being willing to look at it from a different angle. Because I do believe we are taught that in this life. I do believe that we are taught that. I can remember making fun of someone once, and my mom, when the child got out of the car, my mom telling me what a horrible person I was, that I could make fun of someone who had, I think it was a lisp, and I copied them, I mimicked them. And, but she never took the time, and I'm not blaming her, she didn't take the time, because she didn't understand that this is what's so powerful. And we have to learn this. She didn't understand that I needed to learn to think differently about that situation. And so I walked away with a feeling of shame and guilt for having been that horrible of a person. But what that does is perpetuate more of it. So then the next time that I'm going to say something mean or unkind to someone, I'm just going to do it when she's not around. I'm going to do it in a sneakier way. Until the point where you realize that you are attracting that idea to yourself. So it's being willing to go into the subconscious, to ask the question and to stir the pot of the subconscious, to truly want to heal and change whatever it is that is keeping us locked into that which we no longer desire to experience. That's the facing. Erasing it is moving into the beginning of treatment. Erasing it so that it returns the thought, the idea, the belief system that I, you, we are now holding is no longer. It has returned to the nothingness from whence it came originally, and we are replacing it with that thought that we've been talking about today: joy, love, peace, the nature of God, which is our spiritual likeness. And then, after we face, erase, and replace, we can then embrace. I don't know about you, but those affirmations feel really, really good. I don't remember when exactly it was, but I can remember the feeling that I had when I practiced saying, I love myself. I love you, I love you, I love you. And one day got tears in my eyes and said, I really do. I really do love myself. We sometimes learn that we're not good enough to love ourselves. And we are. Because God don't make no junk. We are made in the spiritual likeness of God. And the nature of God. Ernest Holmes said, thought is an inner movement. Face, erase, replace, and embrace. Which is largely the result of one's perception of life and reaction to it. So as we have established our perceptions of the way life shows up, we have reacted to it according to our belief and our perception in it. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I am the authority in which, or that I have the authority in which to tell you how to engage your relationship with God. But I am going to tell you what some of it is for me. And I don't know that we can ever explain all of it, but one of the ideas for our personal relationship with God is that we get really clear with knowing that God is always within us, that we can go there in a moment's notice. In Science of Mind, we teach that God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence. And when we think God, we feel God. It happens automatically because that thought that we have of that loving presence, that divinity, is so powerful that it moves us into feeling. So for me, my God, just like me, has multiple personalities. And one of them is Father, that David talked about. So Father for me is that divine masculine within me that is ever wise, ever bringing wisdom to the table whenever there is a difficulty or a challenge in my life, bringing the wisdom, the divine intelligence, full face. And God is also Mother. God is that divine feminine within me that nurtures and accepts the seed of thought that I plant into it and encourages me to think anew, to think a different thought if I desire a different effect. God is also the inner child. My God just loves to laugh at me, or with me, whichever you want to call it. I know our wire is doing something funny today. But that inner child, that inner God as child is so playful and so inspirational and motivational. That is the part for me that is open to possibility, that right side of the V that opens and slants a little bit and opens up to possibility, because children want to experience more and more. And sometimes I think as adults we get blocked off. This is the way I've always done it, so I might as well keep doing it this way. I remember when David and I first started cooking together and I was like cutting a tomato or something, and he said, "Oh, that's not the way you cut it." And I looked up at him and I was all ready to say, "Really, you're going to tell me how to cut a tomato? You don't think I've cut them for years?" And I stopped myself open to possibility. That playful child came out and said, "Okay, how would you like me to cut it?" I cut it that way, and I have been the sous chef ever since. He cooks all the meals, and women are forever talking to me about what I'm going to cook for dinner or whatever, and I say, whatever my husband has, that's what I'm having for dinner. He's a wonderful cook. So, I might get a hold of this thing. Another thing that God is to me is friend, comforter. Yes, my God does wrap its arms around me. I can feel the embrace, the feeling of the embrace of perfection wrapping itself around me, reminding me when I forget that all is well and that all is God, and yes, you can do this. And one final one that I don't think will surprise anyone who's ever heard me speak before is nature. Nature is absolutely God in effect, God in demonstration, God in form. It is awe-inspiring. It is filled with another idea that is the nature of God, which is beauty. And it is evidence and proof for me of an ever-loving God. Who could ever have dreamed of evolving physicality of life into the oceans and the colors and the sky and standing on a mountaintop and looking at the rolling hills below you, the massive amount of forests and green trees like green velvet. It is magnificent and always restorative. So God being personal to each of us is something that we get to do in the good times and in what appears to be the bad times. Because as soon as we move inward and remember the truth of God, we remember the truth of us. And as we remember the truth of us, there is no problem. There is no challenge. It's simply something more to walk through. And we'll walk through it with grace, with beauty, with peace, and with love. And as I have been so loving to do, I will close with an Ernest Holmes quote, which is, "What we are looking for, we are looking with, and we are looking at." And I am looking at you. Every one of you, beautiful, identical to God natures. Thank you for being a blessing in my life. All of you. And so it is. Let us